Hello, I'm Jonathan, and today I'm with the Christian rapper Ortinel G. I'll be asking him a few questions regarding the prosperity gospel, the word of faith movement, and its damages in Africa. So these topics are inspirations behind his new song, Truth, right? So let's get started. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's go, man.
So first question, what is the prosperity gospel?
That's a good question. So the prosperity gospel, also known as prosperity theology, is a religious belief among some Protestant Christians that financial blessing and physical well-being are always the will of God for them, and that faith, positive speech, and donation to religious causes will increase one's material wealth. So that's it in a nutshell.
That's good. So what is your history with your prosperity gospel?
So my history with the prosperity gospel actually goes back before I even existed. So yeah, a few years before I was born, my parents entered the Pentecostal church. So I was born smack bang, in that. So growing up, I didn't know that it was a prosperity gospel because to us it was the gospel. It was all we knew until relatively a few years ago until started getting into theology, actually started hearing the gospel, and then it's like, hold on, it's like, this what I'm being told, is it really biblical? So I'll say that's kind of my history and running in with prosperity gospel.
So with that, what are the main teaching of prosperity gospel, and what Bible verses are they taken from? Are they really what the Bible says? So let's start with the healing. What do you say about it?
Yeah, that's very interesting actually. So like with healing, so the prosperity gospel teaches that complete healing of soul, spirit, and body is included in Jesus' death, and therefore it is available here and now to all who believe in Jesus, which means that a Christian should never get sick. And if you do get sick, it's Satan tempting you, so you must pray against it and expect to be healed. And if you are not healed, it means you do not have enough faith. And one of the main passages that is used to back this up is Isaiah 53 verse 5, which says, by his stripes we are healed. However, is this what Isaiah 53 is actually saying? That would be my question that I'll pose. And did you want to dive into Isaiah 53 and really see if that's what it's really saying? All right, so for Isaiah, it's important to read Isaiah 53 in light of the whole book of Isaiah and place this chapter in its proper context. Because Isaiah is a prophetic book in which Isaiah, the messenger of God, is going to the Israelites and telling them that God is bringing judgment on them for their sins, for breaking the commandments, basically. And God is going to do that by using the Babylonians to come and take the Israelites into exile and into captivity. However, throughout the book of Isaiah, we get this glimpse of hope, which come together in Isaiah 49 onwards with this idea of the servant who will be like the representative of Israel, and through him he will somehow deliver Israel. And the surprise comes in Isaiah 53 because we found out that the way the servant will actually deliver the Israelites is actually by suffering. So he will actually undergo the consequences of their sin. So he will get wounded on their behalf so that the actual Israelites, they can be freed from the consequences of their sin, in which this book is talking about. It's exile. And so that's what Isaiah 53 verse 5 is actually talking about, by stripes we are healed. It's that this servant will be wounded so his people, they can be healed from the consequences of their own sin and from their exile. And so when the first Christians, they read that, they saw that that's exactly what Jesus Christ accomplished in his death for the Israelites. But also the first Christians saw that it just wasn't for the Israelites. Now it was for the whole world. Jesus did that for the whole, because all of us are basically being wounded by sin and the consequences of our sin. And through what Jesus has done, Jesus has actually brought healing to a world that is dying and is being plagued by sin. And so that's what Isaiah 53 is talking about. It is not talking about that Christians will never get sick from disease, even though we should pray for healing, and Jesus still heals people today, it doesn't mean that Christians will never get sick. I would just say that, one, that is just a denial of reality. And I believe it's a denial of the greater truth of our mortality, which the Bible is trying to communicate. We're mortals. We're mortals, and we're going to get sick and die eventually. But we should know that our sins have been paid for. So in front of God, when the judgment day comes, we can stand as those who are free from the punishment of our sins because of what Jesus has done.
Right. So is it in the same passage that says being prosperous as well?
So prosperity preachers use that sometimes, but they tend to use a different passage. Jeremiah 29:11, which is very famous, you know. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, and plans to give you a future. And again, just like I proposed with Isaiah, I would say that dive into Jeremiah and try to see, because Jeremiah is very similar to Isaiah. The context is very similar. It's Jeremiah going to announce the message that God is bringing judgment to the Israelites because of their sin, and He's going to do that through King Nebuchadnezzar, through the Babylonians.
True.
And in particular, in Jeremiah 29, if you look at Jeremiah 29, it's actually, people forget the first 9 verses, because the first 9 verses are actually pretty depressing. It's Jeremiah who is in Jerusalem. He's actually sending this letter to, there's already people in exile. Some of the Israelites are already in exile. He's sending this letter to the elders and the priests there, and it's basically God saying that I actually am responsible for you guys going into exile. I actually did this, as a punishment for your sin. And Jeremiah also writes, you guys should get comfortable there. Get married, have kids, because you guys are going to be there for a long time. You guys are going to be there for a long time, so get comfortable. So you're just there is no hope.
There's no hope.
They're down for, they're sitting in their sin. And then Jeremiah 29 verse 10 comes, which is that this will not last forever. That in our period, there'll be a period and the Lord will actually come and redeem His people. And then we get Jeremiah 29:11, which is actually God saying that His purposes are not to destroy the Israelites or to destroy humanity, but His purposes are actually to bless and to give hope. And that's initially what Jeremiah is talking about. So, just as we finish up on Jeremiah, I just want to say a few things. First of all, Jeremiah 29 verse 11 was not written for 21st century people. It was God's promise to the ancient Israelites who were in exile, and not you, first of all. However, when we read this in its context as being to the ancient Israelites who are rotting in exile because of the result of their sin and rebellion, then we see that this is a forward-pointing story in what God will do for all of humanity that is exiled in the consequences of their sin. And God will do that by bringing salvation through Jesus. Even though the world may look hopeless and broken, and even though we may be sitting, rotting in the consequences of our sin, God brought and has brought salvation in Jesus Christ. And that's initially what Jeremiah 29 should point us to. It's not about that you're going to be prosperity and God, all He wants for you is to have a Lamborghini. No, it's about God's purposes in the world is initially to bless His people in a biblical way.
Right. So what about faith and speaking things to existence?
So that's a very interesting one. So one of the passages that's used in particular for faith is Matthew 17 verse 20, in which Jesus says, because you had little faith, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can tell this mountain to move here and go there, and it will go, nothing will be impossible for you. And just this is, I'll say it's one of the biggest things. If you really want to see that a lot of these prosperity teachings, if they're really biblical, one of the first things I would just tell you, just go read the passages in context. Just read the chapter and read the whole book. Because with Matthew, that's it. If you actually read Matthew 17 in the whole book, in the context of the whole book, you'll see that Jesus is actually giving a talk on faith. He's giving a talk on faith because in this story in particular, it's that there is a boy who's possessed and having seizures. And his dad takes him to the disciples and they couldn't heal him. So then Jesus comes and they take him, and Jesus says, bring him here to me. And then Jesus has a God not just his disciples, but his contemporaries, because it says this, this unbelieving generation, this generation that does not believe. So he's talking to his contemporaries. So what Jesus is actually talking about in that passage, and what he will initially talk about in verse 20, is actually about faith. About faith, and faith that he's talking about, it's in himself. It's not just faith so you can go and make mountains move or you can do stuff. But Jesus is talking about if you place your faith and trust in Jesus, literally the impossible can happen. And that's the whole book of Matthew is pointing your eyes to the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus. That is the impossible happening right there. God bringing salvation to a rebellious humanity that is sinful. It's a holy God, and he brings salvation to a broken, sinful humanity. That is impossible, and it could only be done in Jesus. So these stories are trying to get us to faith in Jesus, and that's why Jesus says, it doesn't. It's not even about the size of your faith. With faith as little as a small mustard seed, you can make the impossible. Because Jesus is not talking about the size of your faith, as some prosperity teachers say, as some prosperity teachers may teach. But Jesus is actually talking about who your faith is in. If your trust and faith is in Jesus and his salvation, then literally you are getting impossible, which is for a human like you and I to be saved, basically, and to become part of the family of Jesus. And I think that's where all these stories are pointing us to, that only when you trust in Jesus will the impossible be possible. Salvation.
So why is the prosperity gospel a danger in Africa?
That's a great question, man. So as we have seen from just these few things, there's a lot more we could have talking about the teachings. But as we've seen from these few teachings that the prosperity gospel is based on lies and distortions of the truth of scripture, But people in Africa are amongst the most vulnerable to it, because people are hurting in poverty. They're sick without the ability to get treatment because they're poor. And people are searching for a source of hope that their lives will get better. Because some people, they don't know, like they don't have the means to go to school, they don't have the means to get a job. So the only hope that they have that one day my life will get better, it's literally a divine intervention if they get a miracle from God. And so for someone like that, the prosperity gospel sounds like candy. It's like a lollipop literally to the ears. And that's why a lot of people in Africa are falling prey to this, including our own families. They're falling prey to this gospel. And I really think that's what makes it dangerous, because this is actually manipulating people, manipulating the vulnerable by distorting what the Bible is really teaching us.
So just following up on that, what are the thoughts of tithing then?
So what are my thoughts on tithing? Well, this is controversial, man. You're getting into controversial waters here, and just a quick side note. If anybody wants to talk more about this, hit me up on Instagram. So my first thing with tithing is that there is nothing wrong with giving 10% of your income to your local church to take care of needs in love. There's nothing wrong. However, can someone show me a passage that says anything about tithing in the New Testament? No. What does that mean? We don't have it. The New Testament is silent about tithing.
There is a woman in the Bible that gave
the pennies or whatever she gave, and then Jesus was like, yes, that lady. But then again,
so it's a passage.
Yes, but was that passage talking initially about tithing? So it's great how you brought that up, because the idea of tithing. Well, let's trace the idea of tithing. So the idea of tithing is found in in the Pentateuch of Moses, in the first 5 books, in particular, Leviticus and Deuteronomy. So tithing was God ordained. Tithing was God ordained in the Old Testament. But what was the idea behind it? It was for the Levitical priests, who they literally just worked in the temple. They did not have other jobs. They could not work land or other job. So it was literally a system so that they could have something to eat as well. And they could have some way to look after themselves and survive as well. And also, actually, the tithing that people forget about, there was also a tithing, there was also a means of bringing food for the poor, the needy, and the slaves, This was such big parts of the Old Testament. And the other thing about tithing was done using agricultural means such as food and crops. You know what I mean? So with that, it makes sense 10%. But when you actually start using it with money, that's my biggest argument, and it starts to fall. If you have $1 million and you give 10%, you're not gonna feel it as much as if I have $100 and give 10%.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think, that's where it just starts to collapse with money. And then the other thing, now coming to the New Testament, when Jesus talks about giving, when he talks about alms giving, initially the Hebrew word there, we can say the word tzedakah, which is the word that is used for righteousness, but it also came to be used with acts of righteousness, acts of doing right. When Jesus is talking about it, around that time, it was actually giving to the needy, and giving to those that I need, and giving to the poor. And in the New Testament, when Paul talks about giving, when Paul goes around getting a collection, he's not getting it for the Levitical priests, but Paul is getting it for the needy people. He's going around the churches collecting money for the needy people. So I think that the Bible, what it's trying to communicate to us is that tithing was for a specific place and a specific time. But what the Bible wants us more to do, though, is to use our money generously giving. And this again where it comes, because the whole idea behind a lot of tithing theology is that you need to give God 10% so that God can bless you. And they will use that passage, if you bring that if you bring, things to my house, to my temple, if you bring sacrifices, won't I release the gates of heaven? But that is not how the God of the Old Testament, even the Old Testament, where God was telling those people for a specific reason, because they were being greedy and they didn't want to give anything. But God is not telling us that, this is how you get God to bless you, because God actually initially blesses people out of his grace and his generosity. God is not a genie in a bottle that we have to rub. So that's some of my idea on tithing. There's nothing wrong with giving 10%, but what the Bible wants us more to focus on is to be generous with our money. So it's not just about giving money to your pastor or whoever, even though there's nothing wrong with that, but we should be caring for the needy and the poor, and sometimes it should be more than 10%. If you can give more than 10%, you should give more than 10%.
Right.
That's what I think.
What would you say to someone who's currently attending a prosperity gospel church?
Whew, that's a good question.
There's a lot of people, like there's a lot of churches out there. So I can't name the churches, but what can you say about that? My plea with them will be, it is very important to get yourself in front of hearing the biblical gospel, because that's what brings life. The prosperity gospel, even though people may say it doesn't bring life. And again, so there's some people who are in prosperity gospel churches, and maybe God is calling them, like a Jeremiah or an Isaiah, to be messengers to that church so that they can get them preaching the biblical gospel. But my plea would just be that for real transformation, real deep healing, and faith, we just spoke about that, you actually really need to be hearing the biblical gospel. So my plea would be, get yourself somewhere where you can hear the gospel. And if anybody's wondering about churches and that, feel free to hit me up. I'm not saying 100% I might help you, but I'll try as much as I can to help you with churches, because it's a big important question for a lot of people. So where do I go to now, if I leave this church? Yes. So for someone waiting to learn more about this, what resources would you recommend to them?
I would recommend a few resources that have been personally helpful to me. So first one, I recommend Dr. Femi Adile, his book Preachers of a Different Gospel. The reason why Dr. Femi Adile, to me, I would recommend him, number one, is the fact that he's African, and he's also from the Pentecostal movement. Like, he grew up in the Pentecostal movement with its beginnings in Africa, actually in the 70s. So he's somebody who knows a lot about the prosperity gospel, and he's able to, he's an elderly man, so he's been able to live for a while, see a lot of things, but at the same time though, be able to learn theology and be able to come and hear the real gospel, and now he's sharing it. So his book has been amazing for me. He's taught me a lot that I didn't know. Another book that I would highly recommend is actually interesting. It's by Benny Hinn's nephew, Kosti W. Hinn, who he's a pastor now. His book, God, Greed, and the Prosperity Gospel, where he talks a little bit about his family history, but the important thing is he points you to the gospel. And other resources that I'll give, all these resources will be in the descriptions, by the way. Justin Peters' ministry, if you want to find out about the Prosperity Gospel 101, This guy has literally spent his life like just studying the prosperity gospel. I'll also recommend John Piper's spoken word on the prosperity gospel. So those are just a few things that I would recommend as a starter, and you can go from there and continue to learn.
All right. So now concerning your new song, Truth, which is releasing on November 30th, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So what do you have to say about it?
So the first thing I would say about Truth, besides get it. The first thing I would say about Truth is that it's very personal to me. Truth is very personal to me because I actually wrote it when I was experiencing prosperity preaching like every Sunday. So everything I say in that, it's actually true. I didn't like sit back and then I was actually writing it. I was going. It was actually like a diary. So you hear me ranting about what I was disagreeing with and the theology and that I was wrestling with. So so it's very, very dear and personal to me. I've held it for a while now and finally putting it out there. So and the other thing again, the production on this song is amazing. ATM and the whole team works really hard to really make this song something that will make your ears want to listen to it. But then again, the main important thing behind this song is the message. Again, I'm hoping to reach as many people as I can with the truth of Jesus Christ, and the real gospel is what sets you free, not the pseudo gospel of the prosperity gospel. Sure.
Thank you, Ortinel.
Thank you.
So we're gonna conclude. So there, guys, that concludes our questions and answers for today.
Let me guess, you count money to the ceiling, oh. Difference between a side list, a couple million, oh. Blessing, prosperity everywhere you go. Yeah, I heard it 40 times in the sermon, whoa. Yeah, you been preaching for that backing.